Don't try to sneak into your room like that. I know what you've got behind your back. Records. More new records.
The room video that was posted a couple of weeks ago on my YouTube channel and on the Absolute Sounds YouTube channel has gotten over 83,000 views on trackingangle.com YouTube channel and about 30,000 views on the Absolute Sounds channel. And shortly after it posted, I started getting emails from people saying, why don't you show your cartridges and talk about your cables so you can really inflame a lot of people? And that's a good idea. So let's do that now. I will show you some of the cartridges that are here. Not all the cartridges, but many of the cartridges that are here. So let's start with a novelty cartridge. This is the Aperture COSE. I think this was the early 80s when this came out. So it's called the COSE, K-O-C-E, which is an anagram for Coke. So you see it's white. And there's also, the Aperture also made a Maui blue and a Panama red. So you know where they were thinking and where they were coming from. I haven't played this in a really long time. I kind of have a very intense recollection of how this sounded, a very high energy recollection. The Panama red and the Maui blue, I don't really remember much about how those sounded. I don't know why that would be. But anyway, I haven't played this in a really long time. It's a moving coil cartridge, and that's all I'm going to say about this. Okay, now let's move over to the Shure cartridges. Here is a V15 Type 2 that I picked up at a garage sale. It was installed in it could have either been a Benjamin Miracord or it might have been in a Dual turntable. I don't remember. But the 2 was very famous when this came out because these were the first really high quality moving magnet cartridges that Shure made. And they tracked from 3/4 to 1.5 grams. That was kind of revolutionary. And they cost about $67. That was outrage. $67. Why? Before this happened, you could get a cartridge for a penny. But you'd buy a turntable, like a Dual or a Miracord or whatever, and they would throw in a good cartridge for a penny. And then all of a sudden, Shure was charging $67 for a cartridge. It's an outrage. But these were great cartridges. So that's the V15 Type 2. And then I have a V15 Type 3 here with a VN35MR stylus, which was an extra cost stylus that I picked up at another garage. This is also a garage sale item. I picked up another one at another garage sale, and I have the one that came with this cartridge, the regular stylus, and I've recorded with this, and it sounds great, and it's still in good shape. I've also got a 78 RPM stylus for this that I used when I reviewed the Hagerman Archivist phono preamp. I used the 78 RPM one, popped it in here, and those files sounded really good if you played those. You were hearing this cartridge with the 78 RPM stylus in it. So that's this. And also here is, this is Shure's final great cartridge, the MR, I keep forgetting the V15 5X MR. This was their last great cartridge, and it's too bad this is no longer manufactured. They claimed there was a problem with manufacturing the beryllium cantilevers, or there's some beryllium in this that was dangerous for people's health in the manufacturing part of it, not in the playback part of it. And so they stopped. And this one's almost new, because what ends up happening is I get it, I put it in, I review it, and then I put it away and go to the next cartridge. So it's in very, very good condition, and this is a reference quality moving magnet cartridge for sure. No pun intended. I've also got the Gico stylus replacement for the V15, which you can still get. And this, in some instances, sounds better than the original, actually, or it's certainly in the same league as the original. So if you can find a V15, if somebody doesn't know you can get a replacement stylus and they're selling one cheap because they don't know about this, pick it up and get this stylus for not that much money, and you'll have a great moving magnet cartridge. So that's that. This is a really interesting cartridge. It's a moving coil cartridge. It's an AT30E from Audio-Technica, a moving coil that you could actually remove the stylus. And that's something you cannot do on any other moving coil cartridge. And I'm going to try to do that, remove it for you here so you can see. Ah, there we go. So here it is. Now, here is the stylus assembly and the coils are there, and the magnet structure is here. So you could actually get a replacement stylus for this. And that's kind of unique. I haven't played this in decades either, unfortunately. All right, now let's move on to the Grado cartridges that I've got here. So I've got a bunch of very inexpensive Grados, the $30, $25, $39 cartridges. I didn't take those out, but I've got them. And here is a Grado. This is a Grado. I forgot what it is. This is a Grado Opus 3, currently available, wooden-bodied cartridge. And I used this recently in a review of a turntable. I think I used it in the Technics turntable review. Really nice cartridge. Wood-bodied moving iron cartridge. The big issue with these is the coils are kind of exposed. So if you put this in a Riga turntable, when it gets over where the motor is, you'll pick up hum. There are ways of dealing with that I'm not going to talk about right now. Let me go right to the top of the Grado line. And we have the Epoch or Epoch cartridges. These are very, very expensive. And they're made of, there's a sapphire cantilever, and I think it's cocobolo wood. Here's that. You know, let's talk about cartridge design and cartridge design strategies. So some manufacturers, and I'd put Grado in this category, and Koetsu and a bunch of other companies, what they do is they tune the sound of the cartridge depending upon what kind of material they use for the body, whether it's wood or stone or whatever they put the cartridge in. It gives it a certain character, and they carefully tune it to have a certain sound. And I would say that's true of Grado's cartridges. Other companies work to do the opposite. They work to remove all resonances, so you're getting more of, I don't want to say an honest sound, but let's say a direct sound of what's coming off of the record, rather than something that's been tuned and modified to have a certain sound. There also should be much better instructions on how to put these stylus guards on, because some of them can be really tricky. So that's the Epoch or Epoch 3. This is a mono version of it, and this is the stereo version of it. And I'm not going to take the stylus guard off because there's no point. It's the same cartridge. Okay, those are 3 Grados, and of course the Grados come in beautiful boxes. Shure, actually, I think Shure was the first company to start packing cartridges in beautiful wooden boxes, and that has remained a cartridge manufacturer tradition since 1960, whenever that was. All right, let's move on to the final moving magnet cartridge that I have here. This is a Cartridge Man cartridge, and yes, it looks like a Grado, and it started life as a Grado, and then he modifies it. You can't remove the stylus on this; it's locked in. And he also, I think he also put something in here to keep the coils from being exposed to magnetic flux from a motor to induce hum. This is a very nice sounding cartridge, actually, this Cartridge Man cartridge. And there's an interesting story associated with this that I thought I would tell you. So the Cartridge Man made a really nice stylus pressure gauge, battery powered, rechargeable battery powered. And what was really good about it, aside from the fact that it was a strain gauge and really accurate, is that it measured the cartridge pressure right at the surface of the record. It was really low, right onto the surface of the record. So it was very, very accurate no matter what kind of arm you had. Some arms change stylus pressure as you raise them up above the record, and so this one didn't. I hadn't used it in over 20 years, and because the battery finally pooped out and I wasn't about to start changing the battery, I just let it go for over 20 years. And then one day I said, you know what, let me resurrect this thing. It's ridiculous. It's so good. I haven't used it in so long. I'll resurrect it. So I emailed Len Gregory, the Cartridge Man, and I said, Len, haven't spoken to you in 20 years. I hope COVID's not a problem for you. I want to replace the battery on this. What's the best way to do that? And I didn't hear back right away because if I don't hear back right away, I get very, very fidgety. So I opened it up myself and I found the battery type and I ordered one online and I was waiting for it to show up. The next morning, I get an email from Len Gregory's wife, and she says, Michael, thanks for writing. Len unexpectedly passed away last night in his sleep. That's weird. I don't know what world you live in, but that to me is really, really creepy. You know, something made me think of Len Gregory, and something made me want to resurrect this stylus pressure gauge, and then he died that night. Okay, anyway. Other people who are cynics say, oh, that's just a coincidence. That happens all the time. Really? Has that happened in your life all the time? Hasn't happened in my life all the time. Anyway, that's the Cartridge Man cartridge. So here is a Lyra Etna. And one of these is an Etna and one of these is an Etna SL. And the only way to know which is which is by the serial number. Now I'm gonna take it's much easier to take the stylus guard off when it's mounted on an arm, but so these are really fantastic cartridges, and what Lyra tried to do is what they try to do, and what they do very effectively is eliminate all resonances. You know, when that stylus is going through the groove, it's creating a lot of vibrations. That's what it does. And those vibrations hopefully will get up into the motor of the cartridge without vibrating the whole cartridge and without vibrating the arm. That's the goal. And so Jonathan Carr worked very hard in these latest designs to eliminate all resonances erupting in the body of the cartridge. So this is the Etna. It's also it's an asymmetrical design, also for that same reason of eliminating resonances. So one of these is the SL version, which has lower output and fewer coil turns, lower mass, and therefore lower mass means it's going to deliver more detail. And here's the other one, and these use an Agora special fine line stylus profile, and these are great sounding cartridges, as I'm sure many of you know. I also have here an original Atlas, the green-bodied Atlas. One of these is a mono Atlas, and one of these is a stereo Atlas. People that love these cartridges love them for the amount of detail they resolved. They're incredibly detailed, fast cartridges. People that didn't like them because they could have a little bit of an etch or a little bit of a kind of a analytic quality to them, and that some people didn't like that. I love these. Now let me put this back in here. And then here's this is probably the mono one. Same design, and it's not mono because it's strapped. It's not strapped, it's an actual mono cartridge. It's that. And I think that's, oh, and then of course I have the Lambda SL. And with the Atlas Lambda SL, this is a complete redesign of a cartridge. It's aside from the fact that the material is now purple as opposed to green, it's a complete redesign of the suspension system. And the difference the suspension system redesign makes is enormous. So all of the issues that people had with these cartridges sounding kind of lean or analytical have gone away. And this cartridge combines incredible detail with a suppleness and texture to the harmonics and to the transients that really makes it a wonderful cartridge. And, you know, very, very expensive, about $12,000. And again, I'm not going into severe detail about each of these cartridges because you can read the reviews online, which is the best way to deal with that. All right, that's the Lyra line. Now let's get to the Ortofon line. The Ortofon line, when Leif Johansson took over Ortofon from Per Windfeld and began moving the cartridges into a whole nother realm, he made some changes that made their cartridges among the most unique and high-tech in the world. So this is the original, his original first design. This is the Ortofon A90 to celebrate Ortofon's 90th birthday. So this is the first cartridge that uses selective laser melt technology to create a body that's selective laser melted as opposed to being carved away with CNC machining. You could not CNC machine a cartridge with this shape. And it uses a boron cantilever and a one of their replicant styli. And this cartridge really, to me, was a revelation. This is a fast, clean, highly detailed cartridge that some people didn't like because they felt it wasn't filled out enough. The harmonics weren't filled out enough. But this is like a high-sprung sports car kind of cartridge. And I think this will go down in history as one of the classic cartridges ever designed. When he showed this to me at a CES, no, it was in Munich actually, Munich show, since it was their Ortofon's 90th birthday, so it was quite so many years ago. It was mind-blowing. I'd never seen a cartridge like that. So that was the A90. And at the time, the president of Ortofon, who I didn't know at the time, he was involved with a group of people that bought Ortofon from the previous owners. And he said to me, so Michael, is this vinyl thing going to last? Is this just a fad? I said, no, I think it's real. I didn't realize that part of the reason he was asking me that is because if vinyl went away, the big investment he and a group of people had made in buying Ortofon probably would have, they would have tanked. I said, I think it's gonna get much bigger than it is now. He said, okay. So then 5 years later, they came out with the A95, which is this cartridge, and you can see it's got a very similar kind of look, but it's bigger and more filled out. Also selective laser melt. And I believe this entire body is made out of titanium. And this took the A90 to another level by filling in the harmonic structure and giving it more body, yet it still had the speed and detail of the A90. This is another really, really great cartridge. If my life changed and I had to get rid of all this stuff and I was stuck with one cartridge, I could live with this cartridge for sure. No doubt. And that's the A95. Then, to celebrate Ortofon's 100th anniversary, and again, when the A95 came out, the president of the company said to me, Michael, do you think this analog revival is going to continue? And I said it would 5 years ago, and I think it will. I mean, it's 5 years later, and it's still going strong. It's growing every year. And then 5 years later was the 100th anniversary of Ortofon, and of course, the business exploded, and the regular inexpensive 2M red and 2M blue, and that whole 2M line was selling like crazy, and the OM series, the really cheap ones, were selling like crazy and being put in turntables that were flying off the shelf, cheap turntables flying off the shelves. So yeah, everything was going good. So for the 100th anniversary, they created this limited edition MC100. This is a really monumental this cartridge has wallop and slam and limited edition. And I'll tell you the story of this cartridge. So when Ortofon had their 100th anniversary, they contacted me and said, would you like to come to our country, come to Denmark and talk? We're having a big party to celebrate 100. Would you come and make a presentation on our behalf to our assembled guests? And the assembled guests were not just people in the analog vinyl world. It was also the scientific side of Ortofon, the people that design all of the elastomers used in hearing aids and other research that they do. They have this whole other side of their business that's involved in that, scientific research. And miniaturization, because they're really good at that kind of stuff. So I said, sure, I'll come. So they flew me over, and I gave a funny speech, which I probably could. I have all of the paperwork for it. I have the whole presentation. I probably could give it so you could hear what it was. But it had a lot of humor and jokes. It was very different from the speeches that came before it and the speeches that came afterwards, which were very dry scientific speeches about all the research that Ortophon does. And so when it was, I felt, ooh, maybe I made a big mistake. So when I spoke to them afterwards, they go, no, that was exactly what we needed. This was getting, people were like, so it was good. And in exchange for my work, they gave me this cartridge. So if you think I'm bought off and paid for, well, I don't really care. I did a great job for them. I gave a good speech, and I got this cartridge. And again, it's almost new. I reviewed it, I played it, and I don't really have much time to play it because I'm busy with other cartridges. You know, one day when I retire, if I ever retire, I'll have time to sit down and luxuriate and play all of these wonderful cartridges as I can. Then I also have the Verismo here, which is another update. It's very similar in style to the A90 and the A95, but it features a diamond cantilever, and at around $6,000 or $7,000, it's about $7,000, you get a lot of what the top of the line Ortophon cartridges, the MC Diamond, gives you. You get a lot of it, but you get it on a slightly faster, leaner track. And if you're a rock and roller and you've got some money to spend, you will love this cartridge, the Verismo, which I bought. You know, what happens is when you review cartridges and you put hundreds and hundreds of hours on them, what is the company going to do? Either they give it to another reviewer, or they say, you want to buy it? We'll give you a good price on it. And so that's how I got these cartridges. I bought them at a very good price. And this is another, I left this in for a really long time after I was finished with the review. I just said, I don't want to hear any other cartridges for a while. I want to hear this one. This one just combined speed and attack and detail and resolution of the bigger cartridges, of the lesser cartridges like the A90 and A95, with some of the body and texture of the more costliest ones. So here is the MC Diamond, which I reviewed, and this is a great cartridge. This took over from the MC Anna, which of course, for Anna Tremblenko, or whatever, however it's pronounced, who turned out to be a Putin ally, supposedly, and they just didn't want to be associated with that after what happened. So they completely redesigned the elastomer in this cartridge, just like they did with the Lyra cartridges. Lyra did with their cartridges. And so this cartridge is a way different sounding cartridge than the Anna Diamond. This is the MC Diamond. And the price actually came down to about $10,000. Yes, these are expensive cartridges, yes. And you'd have to hear them. You'd have to hear them to understand what they give you, and that you don't get for a lot less money. And that's the MC Diamond. Again, I reviewed it. I put it away so I could review other cartridges, and one day soon I'll get back to that. Okay, there's more to go. There's more to go. Let's talk about the Miyajima Labs cartridges. These are definitely of a style. So this is the Miyajima Labs Infinity Mono cartridge. It's a wood-bodied cartridge. It has a sound. It has a really great kind of vintage sound for mono records from the 50s. It just makes those records sound like you want to hear them. It tracks around 3 grams, which is fine for mono records, and that's the Infinity. Now I also have here a couple of older Miyajima Labs mono cartridges. This is the Zero. I'll take it out here. Again, wood body with a particular sound, not bulbous, not like soft and warm, but just a kiss of whatever it is that makes mono records from the 50s have a certain kind of vibe. Really nice cartridge. And then I have the Premium BE. I'm not going to take it out. This is another mono Miyajima Labs cartridge. And I hold on to these. I do not sell them. And now here is one of my favorites right here. Wait a second. This is the limited edition. This was costly because it's limited edition. I had to buy it, and I bought it at a heavy price, but I had to have it. This is the Miyajima Labs Snakewood. It's a stereo cartridge. And the Snakewood, the Madaki is one of the top cartridges that Miyajima Labs manufactured in stereo. And this is the special one that is made out of snakewood. And the snakewood just gives this thing, it's a very hard wood. If you screw it down too tight, you'll crack it. You have to be very careful. This cartridge has just slam and body and impact, and it's very addictive. And again, I haven't played this in a long time either because I just have too many other cartridges to review, but one day I'll get back to it. And if I don't, someone, after my obituary is published, someone else will get it, and that's fine. It's almost new because it's not been played that much. And that's the Snakewood. All right, that takes care of my Miyajima Labs cartridges. Now, on to the Fugu. And this is still in a, I'm not going to loosen this. This cartridge has no stylus guard. So the Fugu is a legendary cartridge that was designed by the guy who, I don't have the entire story straight in my head, but the Miyabi cartridges from the 70s and 80s, I believe. The same gentleman whose name I cannot recall because I'm not good with Japanese names. This cartridge is still in production. This is a very special, this has a warmish, but not too warmish sound. It doesn't have a bump kind of sound. It's not like a warm, blobby, bumpy sound. It's got a velvety, smooth kind of overall sound with good detail that a lot of people have fallen in love with and love, and that's the Fugu. Then I also have, this is the Red Rose Music. This was Mark Levinson's company at one point, and I believe that this cartridge is also made by the same gentleman who makes the Fugu. It looks similar. It's round. You certainly aren't going to use the body of this cartridge to align your cantilever because you can't. And I haven't had this in the system in a long, long time. There's that. Okay, what's left? Oh, there's a couple of interesting things left. So here's a, this is an ADCOM cross-coil cartridge that I broke decades ago, and I actually sent it back to the Garrett brothers in Australia. The real Garrett brothers, when they were still alive. Now, you know, those of you who have been around this business for a long time or have been audiophiles for a long time know that the Garrett brothers were a legendary couple of brothers in Australia who did cartridge rebuilding and manufactured cartridges that had a cult following, and they committed suicide. It was a terrible story. But before they did, this one got sent back, and they rebuilt this ADCOM cross coil. And after it came back, I installed it, and it sounded phenomenal. And then I put it away, and I've really not played it since 1990, whatever. I've got the paperwork for this. And this one I think I probably should sell. Somebody would probably love to have a Garrett Brothers cartridge, a real one. And I paid to have it rebuilt, so I may sell that one. And that's a low output cartridge that has a lot of guts.
Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show.
All right. Now, here is an airtight magnum opus. So this is still available. This doesn't look like the airtight magnum opus that you can buy now because it's actually a prototype of it. So the inside is the magnum opus. The outside is slightly different looking, and I went to the man who founded Airtight, Mr. Miura. I don't know what it was about me, but for some reason he kind of fell in love with me. I don't know what it was about me, but most of the Japanese people I know, they're kind of reticent. They're not huggy kissy kind of people, and I'm not either, really, to tell you the truth. And but this guy, Mr. Miura-san, he would come up to me and he would hug me and he would kiss me, and it was really sweet. And he would give me this Japanese candy to take back home, and I would bring it home. And some years we would open it up at home, my wife and I would eat it. It was fantastic. Other years it was like, what is that? But anyway, one year he came up to me and he said, here is a cartridge. I want you to have this. He was getting very frail at that point in time. And he said, I want you to have, it's a prototype. It's not a real cartridge. I mean, it's our best cartridge effort that we make and design. This is obviously, these are made by Mr. Matsudaira based on their direction, who makes the Eminent Labs cartridges. And he said, I want you to have this. This is a gift from me to you. And I took it. And of course, I'll never sell this cartridge. It's not really to my taste. It's a little too warm. It's not what I like particularly. If people like this warm, kind of sweet, soft, beautiful sound, very similar to the Grados, but I'll never sell this. This is something I'll just keep forever. That's that. And I miss that guy. He was a really sweet guy. I don't want to get teary-eyed here. What else we got here that I haven't shown? I think. Oh, I missed the Haniwa. How could I do that? So this is the Haniwa, Dr. Kubo. And Dr. Kubo is a doctor, not a medical doctor. He's a doctor. And Dr. Kubo, as I found out only recently, actually, Dr. Kubo's real business is software development and programming, and he has quite a large company in Japan. And audio is his hobby. And he was a huge follower of Harry Pearson for the Absolute Sound. And in the early years, at shows where he would bring his gear, he bought a bunch of records from Harry Pearson, and he would have those records splayed around the room and shown. It was also a very kind of sweet tribute to Harry. And this is the latest iteration of the Haniwa cartridge, also built by Matsudaira to his specs. And his specs, he wants to go for as low an internal impedance as possible. That means very few coil turns on the cartridge. This one is below an ohm, I believe, and the model number is, let me get the model number for you. This is the HCTR CO, extremely low internal impedance. Very difficult to drive this. You'd need to use either a current-based phono preamp, because these things put out lots of current, very low voltage. You need a current-based phono preamp, which I have in the CH Precision P1X1, or he makes a passive current amplifier kind of transformer. It's not a transformer, but somehow it's a current amplifier that you take the output of and run into a moving magnet cartridge. And this is an amazing cartridge because it tracks at a gram, at under a gram. He's got a new one that's got like a half a turn, or maybe a turn, that's super low internal impedance, that tracks at 3/4 of a gram, and he sent me files made from it that sounded perfect. I mean, there was no sibilance, no distortion at 3/4 of a gram. So this is the Haniwa. This is a great sounding cartridge also, and people that know about these cartridges love them, and every time he comes out with a lower internal impedance one, they buy it. Another great line of cartridges, the Haniwa. So, are you exhausted by that? I'm exhausted by that. So those are most of the cartridges I've got here. There are some other ones, but you know, it's like Art Baker used to say on the Skippy Peanut Butter sponsored television show, you asked for it, and now you got it. Let's have a calm, deliberative discussion about cables. It's almost impossible to do that, but let's try. So it was a couple of years now ago, I decided to join a Facebook audiophile group just to be pleasant and hang out. So I did. And the first thing I came upon was someone asking a question. He said, I'm looking for some new speaker cables. Any suggestions? And the response came, and it was a picture of Amazon Basics cables. And the guy said, this is all you need. And he said it where you know what he was getting at. This is all you need. Nothing else can possibly make a difference. If you spend more than this, which is probably $16 for a 50-foot length of lamp cord, you're wasting your money. And so, and this is what this was. It was lamp cord. It was 16 gauge, clear plastic, parallel runs of stranded copper wire lamp cord. So I said innocently, do you think the people that are marketing this as loudspeaker cable measured or know about inductance, capacitance, and reactance? And the response came back, you don't know what those things mean? You're old, you're deaf, and you have a shitty room. So right away I knew I was being welcomed to this Facebook group by some really wonderful people. So I got out of there. I tried to make a nice thing out of it, but I couldn't. I got out. So look, cables make a difference. It's the difference between being satisfied with your system and not being satisfied with your system. It's not as important as the main components that you're buying, but it's important. It makes a difference. And if you don't think it makes a difference, what you really should do is contact a company like the cable company, where you can rent cables, put it on a credit card, get them home, try them out, see if you hear a difference. If you don't hear any difference, stick with your lamp cord, whatever it is that you have, but try it. Don't go by the snake oil salesmen or the people who tell you it doesn't make any difference, because it does. So, what's the goal? So when it comes to speaker cable, the goal is to try to create a transmission line from the output of your amplifier to your loudspeaker so that there's no cable reflections. It just matches and locks in electrically. So if you spend a lot of money on cables, for instance, if you were to buy transparent cables, the company Transparent, their top-of-the-line cable, it's very, very expensive. What they do is they come to your house, they measure the impedance of your speakers, which varies over frequency, they measure your amplifier response, and they tailor that network that goes in between the two to help create that transmission line between the two, so you don't get any reflections, and you get a really good connection between the two, and so it electrically behaves properly. That's what they do. Barring that, you have to try to get a cable that is the best fit generally for your speakers and your amplifiers, and the people that make these cables, all the different companies, can probably help guide you by knowing what your amplifier is and what your speakers are. But let's go back to the interconnects between components first. So this is a piece of 50 ohm cable. So it's 50 ohms. It's a known quantity. That is the impedance on one side, it's the impedance on the other side, and it's designed for dart seal electronics, which have a 50 ohm tap output on the preamp and a 50 ohm tap input on the amplifier to create that transmission line between the two. And that works great, and once you have that, you don't need to mess around with cables. This is an interconnect that can go between a preamp, like a phono preamp, and the preamp if the output is a 50 ohm tap. So CH Precision P1 is a 50 ohm output if you want to use it. It's a BNC connector, 50 ohm out, 50 ohm into the dart seal, and you're done. That's just an electrical fact of life. Otherwise, if you don't have a 50 ohm connection, which most of you don't, there are very, very expensive cables and very inexpensive cables, and they're not all the same. So this is Tara Labs Evolution Zero. This is very, very expensive cable that I don't own. I'm borrowing it from them, and they let me use it, which I appreciate. The way I got into this brand of cable is a friend of mine came over who was in the industry but not involved in cables, and he said, I really want you to hear this cable. It's amazing. You'll hear what it does. It's really open and it's easy to hear. I said, I don't want to hear any more cables. I've heard enough cables. I have enough cables to build the George Washington Bridge. No cables. He said, just give it a shot. I'll install it for you. I said, fine. So first we listened to a bunch of music, very familiar music. This is a CD player, so we listened to the analog output of the CD player. And I listened very carefully. I knew the music anyway. I knew what it sounded like. I went into work, came back out. He had switched the cables. I couldn't see what they were. I didn't know anything about them. Played the same music, and it was like, I don't want to say it was night and day, but it was night and day. It was so much more open, so much more transparent. The transients were so much clearer. You could hear further back. The noise floor was, you could hear what this was doing. I said, what is that? That's crazy. And it was the original version of Tower Labs Zero. And this is rectangular core copper in a semi-vacuum. So there's no shielding around the cables. They're not encapsulated in Teflon or any other material. It's like well, it isn't Teflon, but it's not annealed to it. It runs through channels that are in here. It's a whole rigmarole of how it works, which you can read about if you like. I'm not going to talk about it in any more detail. But another interesting thing they do is they float the shield. So most cables connect the shield to ground on one side. They don't do that. They float the shield. So all of the EMI, RFI that gets into the shield does not end up in the ground plane. It stays separate. And you connect the wire that comes out of this cable into this box called a floating ground station on both sides. And on one side, it connects this way. On the other side, it loops back. There's a male and female version of this, and it loops back. So everything on that ground, everything on that shield goes into this box, and this box is inside. It's isolated from EMI RFI, and they claim it's the same material that's used in the B-1 bomber. I don't know. Maybe it is. They say it is. I'll take their word for it. So anything that gets in there stays in there. And then there's another wire here that connects to a star ground that gets grounded in your system to whatever the best ground place is. It could be a chassis ground. It could be a phono ground, but it gets grounded. So all that noise goes out of the system. That makes sense to me, and it works, and you can hear it. And it's very, very expensive, but that's the way it is. And they've been using this for a long, long time. And now grounding, getting rid of noise in the ground plane, has become the next frontier in audiophile. So Computer Audio Designs, Nordost, and Shinyata all have systems to do this. And I bought one. When I heard what it did in my system, I bought the Computer Audio Design system. It's totally passive, and it plugs into an input that you're not using, and the Shinyata works similarly. And it drains out all the noise floating around your system, and you can hear it. They did demos at the Florida Audio Expo, Shinyata did, where they plugged it in and they pulled the plug out. And it's easily audible. It's not like, I'm not sure. You'd hear it. At any rate, I said at any rate, I promise I'd never do that again, but I did. That's what Tower Labs started doing, a similar kind of thing, many years ago. So that became my standard interconnect, all right? Along with the Dart Zeal that I use on my Dart Zeal equipment. More recently, I was sent to check out some other cables. And my speaker cables that I use now are the Audio Quest Dragons. I was sent a set of those 2 years ago probably, and I replaced the Tower Labs that I was using. And again, the difference at that point was, it was very, very big in terms of transparency, openness, and the sense that there was no cable. That's the idea. You don't want to hear a cable. If you don't think you hear cables, just try some different cables, and I promise you, you'll hear cables. You've got to find the right fit. It's like saying shoe sizes don't matter. You know what? Whatever shoe size, it doesn't matter. Just put a pair of shoes on, it will make a difference. It makes a difference. These are Dragon interconnects, and they really are good. They're on the same level as the Tara Labs because you don't hear them. They're just open and transparent, and that's the goal. They really work very, very well. I'm not going to say they sound better, but once you get to that top echelon, you should not hear the cable. You should be able to swap out cables and not hear a difference. Put in lesser cable and you'll hear a difference. And I wish the lesser cable was as good, but it's not. And I've heard those differences. I've tried. I always tell people, send me a $500 cable that you think is as good as this very expensive cable. And if it's as good, if I don't hear a difference, and then what you hear in your head is confirmational bias. You know it's less expensive. If you really believe that stuff, then fine. Then you just believe it. I can't help you. So these are the two brands I really like. Another brand that I have in-house is this is Stealth Sakura. This is a balanced set, and this has a slightly different sonic perspective. It's got this kind of openy. It's hard for me to describe it. It's like more like floating cotton. That's the only way I can describe it to you. It's slightly softer, but for certain digital sources that can tend to be hard and annoying, this works really, really great. And so I like this. By the way, I've had sent to me enough cable to build a bridge, and I've tried it and sent back what didn't work in my system. So it's not as if, well, whatever they send me, I say is great and I endorse it. I'm not here to endorse any of these cables. I'm here to simply tell you what I use in my system and what works for me, which would be these three brands. So when I installed the AudioQuest speaker cable, the Dragon, which are also costly cables, the difference between that and the Tara Labs that I had was very large. The Tara Labs, I didn't realize it till I switched it, were somewhat softening the sound, somewhat rolling it off. It was like an open window when I put in the AudioQuest. It was like I didn't hear cables. The idea is not to hear cables. It just was open and clean and much better. So I put the Tara Labs cables away, and I guess they noticed at Tara Labs that I had made this switch, and they got in touch with me and said, look, the cables that you have there, we designed those cables for the system you had like 10 years ago. Different speakers, different amplifiers, and it's not, the inductance is wrong and it's not the right cable. So why don't you send those back and we'll send you an updated cable. And you're hearing my dogs barking, and that's just the way it is. I'm in my house, I have 4 dogs, and they're going to bark a little bit, don't complain. So I said, fine, I'll send it back. So I sent those cables back, and they sent me these cables. These are Tara Labs Omega Concertos. This is very heavy. This is one run. There are actually 4 of these. So one length is the positive, one length is the negative, and there are 4 of these altogether. I saw the construction of these cables. It takes a guy a week or more to make a set of these cables. And so it's costly, and there's a lot that goes on in the construction of this cable. It's not as if all of this is filled with copper. There's a superstructure in here, an infrastructure that keeps the wires a certain distance apart, however they're twisted and spun, whatever it is, to get the electrical properties they wanted in this cable. So I got these in, and I swapped out, took the AudioQuests out, I put these in, and it just, I kept them in for a couple of days. I broke them in. I have a cable cooker, and I cooked them, and then I put them in, and it was the same as it was before. It just was soft. Some people like a soft sound. I don't. It was soft sounding. It was transients were indistinct. It was everything that I paid for in these speakers. Not everything, but a lot of what I paid for in these speakers, I wasn't getting anymore. So I took it back out, and I put the AudioQuest back in, and everything resolved itself to the way I liked it. And then I was going to email them and tell them, guys, this just doesn't work in my system. But before I could do that, they contacted me, and they said, we just realized we sent you the wrong cables. It's the wrong inductance. These are obviously new cables, but we're so sorry. Have you tried them? I said, yeah, and I heard that. and I packed them up already, and I just have been too busy to get in touch with you, and I'll send these back. And they said, we'll send you the right ones. So I'm still waiting for the right ones, and we'll see. We'll see how it compares. But for right now, I'm extremely happy with what I have. So that takes care of speaker cables. I'm just telling you that if you don't think these make a difference, especially speaker cables, go to the cable company or go to some place or go to a local store that will let you rent cables to try out in your system. And try it out. And if you don't hear any difference, if you think cables are snake oil, and no matter what you try, it sounds the same, then fine. Then that's what you believe, and that's fine. But try it. Don't buy these nudniks online who try to tell you it's all snake oil. Cables can't make a difference. Don't believe that. Believe it, and believe what you hear. Oh, you can't trust your hearing, because it's confirmational bias and whatever. Like this Fremer guy will put this thought in your mind, and I trust you. You trust you. We didn't evolve over millions of years because the twig broke behind us and we didn't know where the twig was. We knew where the twig was. It wasn't snake oil. So trust your own senses. And if you think cables all sound the same, get some cables in your system, different cables, and see what you hear. I know you'll hear a difference because there is a difference. So that's where I am with speaker cables and with interconnects. The final frontier is AC cables. And I know that's another one people say, how can AC cables make a difference? The power comes from the generation station, like in another city or some rural area, and it goes through transmission lines all across the country, and it comes into your house. And then you're telling me the last 3 feet make a difference? That's ridiculous. And I say to those people, so you're telling me that the water comes from the reservoir. It goes through these old pipes, through hundreds of miles of old pipes, comes into your house, comes into your faucet. And you think putting a water filter on the end of that is going to make any difference? Of course it does. You ever put a water filter on the end of your faucet and see what kind of crud ends up in the filter? So let's just say speaker cables are filters. Let's just say that. And they filter out noise and other crud that gets in. So the cables that I own, I had to buy these. These are the AudioQuest Dragon, again. And the way I got these is I had other cables, AC cables in my system that I thought were the best I'd heard. And it was on long-term loan, which was fine. And then I won't go into the details of what happened or what the cables were because it doesn't matter. And they asked for the cables back. I said, fine, give me a chance to get something to replace them with because I don't want to just put rubber cables in there because I know that's going to make my whole system that I spend all this money on sound pretty remarkably bad. So they said, okay. So again, AudioQuest had just, it's this guy Garth Powell who designs their cables, and he's the real deal. He knows what he's talking about. There's a few people in this business who I know what they're doing, and he's one of them. They had just come out with this. I said, all right, could you send me some for me to try? So they sent a few lengths for me to try in my amplifiers, and I put them in. And I was so busy, I wasn't even thinking about the cables. I just put them in, and I was reviewing some records. And one of the first records I reviewed was a reissue of their Satanic Majesty's Request by the Rolling Stones. And Bob Ludwig had remastered it from tape to digital, high-res digital, and it was cut, and I played it. And I'm sitting there, and I'm going, wow, I've had this record since it was new. I've got the original British Decca pressing, and I have never heard. I'm hearing this detail. I'm hearing into the soundstage. I'm hearing transients. There's tracks where they're playing around with instruments, percussive instruments, and you could just hear all this stuff that I never heard it before. And I was like, wow, this reissue is phenomenal. And so I was going to write about it, and I said, wait, I just better play the original before I do that. I got the original out and played it. Same thing. And what it was the difference made by these cables. So open, so transparent, for whatever reason. But I had to buy them because otherwise the politics of it would have made me look bad. It was like, oh yeah, Fremer had to get back those cables and he got these cables. And so now he's going to say good things about these cables. So I said to AudioQuest, I got to buy these. And they said, it's a lot of money. I said, I don't care. I'll pay it off over time. You give me an industry accommodation, which is still a lot of money, and I'll pay for it. So I bought these cables. I paid for them. And the Garth did a demo at CES 5 years ago or so and compared different brands of cables. Just changed the AC cable on a CD player. And everybody in the room, including John Atkinson, heard it, and it drove him crazy that he heard the difference, and he wrote about it and took all this flack from people. I'm just telling you, it makes a difference. Don't believe what you hear from these people that only go by 3 measurements to tell you how things sound. Okay? That's all I got to say about cables. All right, let's talk about the D word, digital audio. So when the compact disc first came around, I was all in favor of digital audio. I thought this was going to be a big improvement. It was going to get rid of all the problems with records, and it got rid of all the problems with analog and tape hiss and flutter, whatever else. I went to an Audio Engineering Society meeting in Los Angeles, and they introduced the compact disc on a player that was the size of a refrigerator. And they had Roxy Music's Avalon, one of my favorite records. I knew it backwards and forwards, and I had every pressing you could mention. I had the Japanese, the American, the British, the Bulgarian. I had them all. And they played this CD, and it was horrible. I mean, the sound was just everything. It was tinny and hard and bright and smeary and terrible. And I said to myself, oh, all right, it's the first demo of this new technology. It's going to take time to develop. It's going to be bad at first, but eventually it'll get good. Fine. All the engineers around me were going, oh my God, that's the best thing I've ever heard. Oh, it's a miracle. That's when I went on my high horse and started my Save Vinyl campaign, because I could see what was going to happen. And I wasn't in the industry at that point. I was working for Walt Disney. I just saw my mission in life was going to be to try to save records. I wasn't the only one that heard it that way. Lots of people did, and they all went about the same business that I did. So now, 40 years later, it's the 40-year anniversary of the compact disc, and a guy named Mike Snyder, who works for USA Today, put up on his Facebook page just yesterday, please tell us about your experience with the compact disc. What was the first compact disc you bought? What do you like about compact discs? What do you not like about compact discs? A whole bunch of questions, and I answered all of his questions. And the first thing I said was the packaging was horrible. This jewel case with the fragile hinges on the side that broke all the time. And for all the money you spent, you got a piece of paper that was stapled together, and it was like a cheap piece of paper. You could barely read it. It was just a horrible package, and it was expensive, and it sounded terrible. It was tinny. It was artificial. It was like you could watch Raymond Massey as Abe Lincoln in a black and white movie, and it was a real person that you could see acting. Or you could go to Disney World, and you could watch a robot of Abraham Lincoln, and boy, it was right in front of you. There was this thing right in front of you that was sounding and moving like a robot, but it was way more real in the sense that it was three-dimensional and there than Raymond Massey in the movies. But which would you rather watch? You'd rather watch a real person, even though it was separated by a few layers of whatever. And so I wrote the sound was bad, the packaging was bad, and I never liked the sound. And they said, what was the thing you most remember about your CD experience? What was the first CD that you bought? I think the first CD I bought was a Brian Eno thing that was not available on record, so I bought it on CD. And what was the most memorable experience you had with CDs? And I said, the most memorable experience I had was when a mastering engineer who had just done the entire Peter Gabriel catalog came by to let me hear them. So he came by, and we sat down, and we played these CDs of Peter Gabriel's catalog, and I said, okay, now I'll play you the original British Charisma pressings, which I only had to play one for him. And he went like, what? Oh my God, that's so much better than what I just brought you. What's going on? I said, I don't know. I just know it is. And, that's what I remember. And now 40 years later, we have high resolution streaming, Qobuz and Tidal, and this sounds so much better than those early CDs. If this had been what I hear now when I stream high-res files, if this had been CD 40 years ago, I wouldn't have gone as crazy as I went 40 years ago. It's much better. I still don't think it's as good as a good record cut from an analog tape. And my wife's friend came down here, and she's in the dog world, my wife. I love the dog world because if you get involved in the dog world, you realize that the hi-fi world is pretty sane compared to the dog world. So I like having that as a comparison. But she came down, and her husband's kind of an audiophile, and she wanted to hear Fleetwood Mac Rumors. So I streamed high-res Rumors from Qobuz, and she'd never heard a system of this caliber, and she said, wow, that's just phenomenal. That is absolutely amazing. I said, now let me play the record, the double 45 cut from the tape about 10 years ago. So I played her some of Rumors from the tape, from the record cut from the tape. And she said, you know what? She said, as good as that file was, she said, I'm a Coca-Cola fanatic. It's one of my pleasures in life is good Coca-Cola. And she said, the file sounded like a good bottle of Coca-Cola, a nice good cold bottle of Coca-Cola. The record that you played, it's like you go to a soda fountain and they have the Coke syrup and they put the carbonated water in it and they stir it up. That's a real Coke. And that's what the record sounded like. The record was like real. It was like you're in the room with Fleetwood Mac. The file was good, but not as good as the record. And that's what I still think about records versus digital. As good as the digital is, something changes that's not quite as good. It's gotten much, much better. It's not quite there yet. And I spoke with a digital engineer who some of you might know, but he doesn't want his name used. And he said, you know, I've been reading you for a long time, and we make a really good A to D converter, but you're right, we're not quite there yet. It's still not quite transparent. We're working on it. We'll get there one day. But it's not there yet. And even records cut from digital files can sound more right than the digital file. I know people scream and yell about that when I say that, but the truth of the matter is all recordings that you own are artificial. They're all distortion on one level. The microphone is terrible. It's colored. It's distorted. Everything in the chain is adding different kinds of distortion to it. So at the end of the day, when you get that file, that's the final digital file. If you can take that digital file and cut a lacquer from it and do something to it and use a better D to A converter for one thing, and cut a lacquer and make a record, and that record ends up sounding more real or more like what you want to hear, then that's fine. Then that's what you want, and that's what you should have. The file that you're streaming is not like this sacrosanct thing. It's just a thing that can be used to make something else. And if you compare the different streaming forms, high-res on Tidal and Qobuz, the same music, they sound completely different. Why is that? Someone has to tell me, because I don't know what it is. I just know that vinyl from analog tape sounds better than digital files. And digital files, high-res digital files, properly turned into a record, can sound more satisfying and have more musical flow and sound better to me than the file itself. And if you say, well, you're listening to a distorted version of it, fine. Every recording you own, everything you listen to that's recorded music is distortion from the microphone on down. It's whatever you like. So what I've got here for a digital system is a DCS Vivaldi 1 Apex system, which is a all-in-one ring DAC, streaming DAC with an SACD transport in it, and it sounds great. And I stream Qobuz and Tidal, and I've got a NAS drive in the other room with 4 SSD drives with over 8,000 high-resolution files. So I'm well into the digital world. It's not like all I do is play records, but when I come in here late at night and I want to relax and listen to music, no matter how many files I try to listen to that sound really great or how much streaming I do, I always end up putting on a record. That's just me. I'm used to it, and that's what I love. So, you know, whatever you like in this world, right now it's the best time to be an audiophile, even to be a music lover. There's great high-resolution files you can stream. There's SACDs you can buy. There's, you know, surround sound SACDs if you like surround sound. There's great vinyl from tape right now. It's the best time to be a music lover right now.